In 1966, somewhere beneath the streets of Lower Manhattan, there was a room that didn't exist. No address, no signage, no record in any city document, any police file, any landlord's ledger. The only way you'd ever know it was there was if somebody took you. And if somebody took you, you'd already made a decision you couldn't take back. The room was 17 steps below street level, a narrow staircase, brick walls sweating with moisture. The air tasted like copper and kerosene, and the further down you went, the louder it got. Not with voices, but with breathing. Dozens of men pressed shoulder to shoulder, their breath forming a low hum in the dark. And at the bottom of those stairs, the floor. Not concrete, not wood, not dirt. Glass, broken bottles, shattered window panes, fragments from smashed mirrors. All of it spread deliberately across a 20 by 20 pit, raked flat like gravel, glinting under the amber flicker of 4 kerosene lamps hung from rusted hooks on the ceiling. The glass was the rule. In the 5 points, in the old fight circuits that had been running since the 1880s, the floor wasn't just a surface, it was a strategy. The glass meant you couldn't run, you couldn't shuffle, you couldn't circle your opponent, couldn't duck laterally, couldn't do the one thing every fighter depends on more than his fists. You couldn't move your feet. The moment you tried to pivot, the glass bit into the sole of your shoe. If you shuffled, it scraped through leather within seconds. Some fighters went barefoot. Those fights lasted 90 seconds, because after 90 seconds, there was enough blood on the glass that every step became a slide. One wrong plant, and your foot would go sideways, and you'd be on the ground. And on the ground, in a glass pit, you stayed. Nobody ran in the glass ring. That was the whole point. The 5 points pit operators had figured something out 100 years before any sports scientist would name it. Terrain denial. Take away a man's ability to move, and you find out what he's really made of. You find out if he can fight standing still. Most men can't. But in December of 1966, a man walked down those 17 steps who was about to prove that standing still was the most dangerous thing he'd ever done. His name was Bruce Lee, and he hadn't come here by choice. To understand why someone like Bruce Lee ended up in a basement in Lower Manhattan, standing on a floor designed to destroy the very thing that made him lethal, you need to understand the man who built that floor. His name was Dominic Caruso, 47 years old, 5'10", 240 pounds, hands like catcher's mitts. A face that had been broken so many times it had settled into a kind of permanent disinterest. Eyes that didn't widen, a jaw that didn't clench, a mouth that sat in a flat line no matter what was happening in front of him. Caruso wasn't a fighter, not anymore. He'd fought in the Navy during Korea, middleweight, 17-2. When he came back to New York, he ran numbers for a crew connected to the 5 points. And when the old fight pits started drying up in the late 50s, too much heat, too many raids, Caruso saw an opportunity. He didn't just restart the pits, he redesigned them. The glass floor was his invention. He'd noticed something watching underground fights his whole life. The best fighters always won by moving. They circled, they feinted, they created angles, which meant the crowd's favorites, the big hitters, the brawlers, the guys with devastating power but slow feet, kept losing. And when the crowd's favorites lost, the house lost. Caruso needed a way to level the playing field. So he filled the floor with broken glass. The glass neutralized speed, it neutralized agility, it turned every fight into a phone booth brawl, a war of attrition fought from the waist up. And suddenly, Caruso's brawlers started winning. The house started winning. Money started flowing. By 1966, Caruso's pit ran twice a month. Fridays, 40 to 60 spectators, each paying between $20 and $100 to watch. The fighters, usually dock workers, ex-cons, amateur boxers looking for cash, got $200 to show and $500 to win. The serious money was in the side bets, and Caruso took 15% of every bet placed. The pit had rules, 3 of them. Rule 1, no leaving the glass. You step off the glass, you lose. Rule 2. No weapons. Hands, elbows, knees, headbutts, all legal. Kicks were allowed in theory, but nobody kicked on glass. The pivot alone would shred your foot. Rule 3. Fight ends when one man can't stand. Not won't. Can't. Caruso had been hearing about Bruce Lee for over a year before the night of December 13th. He'd heard it from his nephew, who trained at a karate school in Queens. He'd heard it from a bookie who'd been at a demonstration in Chinatown. He'd even heard it from one of his own fighters, a heavyweight dock worker named Sal Bianchi, who'd watched Bruce dismantle 3 men at a private gathering and had come back saying, "That ain't a man, that's something they built." Caruso didn't care about martial arts. He cared about one thing. Could Bruce Lee fight standing still? Because if he couldn't, and Caruso was certain he couldn't, then putting him in the pit against one of his heavyweights would be the biggest payday of the year. Bruce Lee didn't know any of this. What Bruce knew was that a man named Raymond Wong, a 43-year-old restaurant owner in Chinatown, someone Bruce had met twice at community events, had called him on December 10th, 1966, and asked for a favor. Wong's voice on the phone was measured, careful. He explained that he was in a difficult position with some men in Lower Manhattan, a financial situation. He owed money. Not a lot, not a little, the kind of amount that's just large enough to make things personal. He told Bruce that these men had offered him a way out. Bring them the Chinese fighter everyone was talking about. Let him fight in their ring. If he fought, Wong's debt was clear. Bruce said no, immediately, flatly. "I don't fight for other people's debts, Raymond." Wong accepted this, thanked him, hung up. 2 days later, on December 12th, Wong called again. This time, his voice was different. There was a tightness in it, a compression, like a man speaking with something pressed against his chest. He didn't repeat the request. Instead, he said something Bruce would later write down. "They came to my restaurant today. They sat down, they ordered food, they ate. They didn't say anything. They just ate and left. And my daughter was working the register." Bruce was quiet for a long time. Then he asked one question. "What time?" That evening, Bruce called Dan Inosanto. Dan was in Los Angeles. The conversation, as Dan would later recount in a 1987 interview, lasted 11 minutes. Bruce told Dan about the call, about the pit, about the glass. Dan's first reaction was practical. "Don't go." Bruce's response was immediate. "He has a daughter." Dan tried again. He asked about the floor. Bruce said he'd been told about it. Broken glass, no footwork, a confined space. Dan asked how he planned to fight without moving his feet. Bruce said, "The same way I learned to fight in the first place." Dan didn't understand at first. Then he did. Wing Chun. The original foundation. The style Bruce had trained in before he ever developed Jeet Kune Do, before he built his entire philosophy around fluidity and movement. Wing Chun, the one martial art in the world that was designed to fight in a phone booth. Wing Chun's primary stance, Yi Ji Kim Yong Ma, was a narrow, pigeon-toed root position, feet barely shoulder-width apart, weight driven straight down. The entire system was built for close-range combat in confined spaces, for situations where you couldn't circle, couldn't retreat, couldn't kick high or throw wide hooks. Wing Chun was chain punches, trapping, and forward pressure. It was the art of standing in one place and making the other man wish he was anywhere else. Bruce hadn't trained pure Wing Chun in years. He'd moved past it, evolved beyond it, built something broader and faster, but the foundation was still there. Buried under layers of boxing footwork and fencing angles and JKD philosophy, the root was still there. Dan asked Bruce if he was sure. Bruce said, "A man who's afraid of standing still is a man who doesn't trust his own hands." Dan would repeat that line in 3 separate interviews over the next 30 years. Each time he'd pause after saying it. Each time you could see him remembering. December 13th, 1966, 10:47 p.m. Raymond Wong picked Bruce up from a hotel near Canal Street. They drove 4 minutes south, parked on a side street. The building looked condemned. A 4-story brick tenement with plywood over the first-floor windows and a padlocked front door. They didn't go through the front door. Wong led Bruce down an alley, through a service entrance, into a hallway lit by a single bare bulb, and then to the staircase. 17 steps down. Bruce was wearing dark pants, a thin black long-sleeved shirt, and flat-soled canvas shoes, the kind he trained in. No tape on his hands, no mouthguard. He'd brought nothing except himself. When they reached the bottom of the stairs, the room opened up. It was larger than Bruce had expected. The ceiling was low, maybe 7 feet, but the space extended maybe 30 feet in each direction. The pit itself was in the center, a recessed square, about 20 by 20, bordered by a low brick ledge. The spectators stood around this ledge, packed tight, their faces orange and moving under the kerosene light. And the floor. Bruce saw it and stopped walking. Wong would later describe this moment. He said Bruce stared at the glass for maybe 5 full seconds. Not with fear, not with surprise, with calculation. His eyes moved across the surface the way a surveyor studies land, assessing depth, density, the size of the fragments, the way the light caught the edges. Then Bruce stepped to the edge of the pit and pressed the toe of his shoe into the glass. Gently, testing the give, the crunch, the way the fragments shifted under pressure. He lifted his foot, examined the sole, tiny scratches, white lines in the black rubber. He looked at Wong and said, "How thick?" Wong didn't know. Bruce knelt down. He pushed his fingers into the glass at the edge of the pit, feeling for the concrete beneath. The layer was about 2 inches deep, enough to shift, to crunch, to catch the edge of a foot mid-pivot. Enough to turn a shuffle into a grind, and a grind into a cut. Bruce stood up, rolled his shoulders once, flexed his fingers open and closed, and then he did something that confused everyone in the room. He took off his shoes. Wong stared. Caruso, standing across the pit, narrowed his eyes. The crowd murmured. Bruce set the shoes neatly at the edge of the pit, side by side. Then he stepped onto the glass, barefoot. The crunch was audible across the room. Why barefoot? Because Bruce had understood something in those 5 seconds of calculation that Caruso hadn't considered in 16 years of running the pit. Shoes on glass were unpredictable. The sole would catch, then slide, then catch again. You'd never know when your foot was going to betray you. But bare feet on glass? That was information. Every fragment, every edge, every shift in the surface. Bruce would feel it directly. His feet would know the terrain the way his hands knew a wooden dummy. He wasn't removing protection. He was removing interference. Bruce walked to the center of the pit. The glass crunched with each step. Tiny cuts opened on the soles of his feet immediately. Nothing deep, nothing disabling, but enough to leave faint red marks on the fragments behind him. He stopped in the center and stood still. He set his feet. Narrow stance, pigeon-toed. Weight dropped straight down through his hips into the ground. His left hand came up. A Wing Chun guard, the Wu Sao, elbow tucked, fingers extended, palm facing inward. His right hand sat lower, the Man Sao, ready to intercept. For the first time in years, Bruce Lee was standing in a pure Wing Chun stance. And he wasn't moving.
Round 1, the dock worker. The first man Caruso sent in was Sal Bianchi, the same dock worker who'd once watched Bruce fight at a private gathering and come back saying Bruce wasn't human. But that was a different Bruce. That was a Bruce who could move, who could circle, who could explode from any angle. This Bruce was standing still on broken glass with bare feet. Bianchi was 6'1", 230 pounds, with hands conditioned from 20 years of loading cargo. His strategy was simple, and it was the only strategy that had ever worked in the pit. Close the distance, clinch and batter. He stepped onto the glass in heavy work boots and moved forward. Bruce didn't move. Bianchi threw a right cross from about 3 feet away. It was a good punch. Fast for his size, committed, aimed at Bruce's jaw. Bruce's left hand, the Wu Sao, intercepted it. Not a block, a deflection. The Pak Sao, his open palm caught the inside of Bianchi's forearm and pushed it across Bruce's body, redirecting the force to the side. In the same motion, the same half second, Bruce's right hand fired forward. A straight punch. Not a hook, not an overhand, not a looping power shot. A Wing Chun straight punch, fist vertical, elbow driving forward, shoulder behind it like a piston. It hit Bianchi in the solar plexus. Bianchi didn't fall, but he folded, his torso compressed, his chin dropped, and for a fraction of a second his guard disappeared. Bruce fired again. Same hand, same punch, this time to the throat. Not full power enough to shock, not enough to crush. Bianchi's head snapped back. He staggered, his boots crunched and scraped on the glass, his feet sliding sideways as the fragments shifted under his weight. And now Bruce demonstrated the principle. He didn't chase, didn't follow. He stood in the center and waited. Because on this floor, in this pit, chasing was a mistake. Moving was a tax. Every step cost something. Balance, stability, skin. Bruce had decided in those first 5 seconds that his strategy was simple. Stand still and make them come to him. Bianchi came again. A left hook this time, wide, aimed at Bruce's temple. Bruce's right hand rose, the bong sao, his forearm rotating outward, deflecting the hook upward and over his head. His left hand fired underneath. A chain punch to Bianchi's ribs. 1, 2, 3. 3 punches in less than a second, each one traveling no more than 6 inches. Each one landing with the whip-crack precision of a man who'd thrown that punch 10,000 times before he was 18 years old. Bianchi tried to clinch. He lunged forward, arms wide, trying to wrap Bruce up. Bruce dropped his weight, shot both hands inside Bianchi's arms, the lop sao, a jerking pull, and yanked Bianchi's left arm across his own body, spinning him off balance. Bianchi's boots hit a thick piece of glass and his right foot slipped. He went to one knee. Bruce stepped forward, 1 step. Glass crunched under his bare foot. He drove a knee into Bianchi's jaw, a sharp upward strike that made a sound the crowd could hear over their own noise. Bianchi went flat. It had been 41 seconds. Caruso didn't change expression. He raised 2 fingers to the man standing beside him. The second fighter stepped forward. Round 2. The boxer, Tony Marchetti, 31 years old, middleweight, amateur boxing record of 14-3, all in the Navy. Fast hands, tight guard, good footwork, usually. On this floor, Marchetti did what every trained boxer does. He tried to move. He shuffled left. The glass caught the ball of his foot, and he winced. He adjusted, tried again. Smaller steps. Testing. Marchetti was smarter than Bianchi. He didn't charge. He used his jab, flicking it out. 1, 1, 2, 1. Trying to measure Bruce's timing from the outside. Bruce stood in his Wing Chun guard and let them come. The first jab he slipped with a tiny head movement. The second he pack-sowed away. The third he caught. Literally caught. Bruce's right hand closed around Marchetti's left fist, mid-extension, his fingers wrapping the glove, and held it. Marchetti froze. For 1 full second both men were still. The crowd went silent. Bruce had Marchetti's fist in his grip, and Marchetti couldn't pull it back. Bruce's fingers were clamped like a vice, his forearm locked, his root anchoring him to the floor. Then Bruce pulled. He yanked Marchetti's arm forward, extending him, collapsing his stance. And as Marchetti stumbled into range, Bruce released the fist and hit him with a palm strike under the chin, a chung chui that stood Marchetti straight up like a puppet, jerked by its strings. The second strike was an elbow. Bruce rotated his hip, just his hip, no footwork, no stance shift, and drove his right elbow into Marchetti's temple. The sound was dense, wet, Marchetti's eyes unfocused. His legs buckled. He sat down on the glass like a man lowering himself into a bath, and then tipped sideways. 53 seconds. Caruso blinked. Once. Then he turned to the man beside him and said something the crowd couldn't hear. The man disappeared up the stairs. 3 minutes later, he came back with someone who hadn't been scheduled to fight that night. Round 3. DeLuca Frank DeLuca, 6'3", 255 pounds, Caruso's enforcer, his collection man, and the undefeated champion of the glass pit. 17 fights, 17 wins, 11 by knockout. DeLuca had hands like Bruce did, fast, educated, precise, but attached to a body that was 80 pounds heavier and 6 inches taller. DeLuca also knew the glass. He didn't wear boots. He wore leather-soled dress shoes, thin, flexible, almost like slippers. He'd learned years ago that the thinner the sole, the more you could feel the floor, and he walked on the glass the way a man walks on a familiar carpet, confident, steady. each step placed with the certainty of someone who'd been here before. He stepped into the pit and looked at Bruce's bare feet, saw the blood, saw the small cuts. He smiled, not cruelty recognition. He understood what Bruce had done with the shoes. He respected it. Then he settled into his stance, hands up, weight balanced, and he didn't move forward. For the first time that night, Bruce's opponent was using his own strategy against him. DeLuca stood still and waited. 15 seconds of silence. The crowd barely breathed. 2 men on broken glass, 6 feet apart, neither willing to move first. The kerosene lamps flickered, shadows jumped on the brick walls. Somewhere above, a pipe dripped water in a rhythm that sounded like a slow clock. Bruce moved first. Not his feet, his hands. He extended his lead hand, the man Sao, reaching toward DeLuca's guard, touching it, feeling it. This was Wing Chun's Chi Sao. Sticky hands, the practice of reading an opponent through physical contact. Bruce's fingers grazed DeLuca's left forearm. He pressed, felt the weight behind it, felt where DeLuca was strong and where he was hollow. DeLuca swatted Bruce's hand away and threw a straight right. Bruce didn't deflect this one. He absorbed it, turned his head with the punch, let it graze his cheek, and in the space DeLuca had opened by extending his arm, Bruce stepped in. 1 step, his bare foot crunched the glass, blood smeared beneath it. And he was inside DeLuca's reach, inside his guard, inside the one place a bigger man never wants a smaller man. Bruce fired chain punches, vertical fists, center line rapid 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 punches in under 2 seconds, each one landing on DeLuca's chest and jaw in a rising line. DeLuca tried to clinch. Bruce used a jut sao, a sharp downward jerk on DeLuca's right arm, pulling it out of position, and then hit him with a palm strike to the nose. DeLuca's head snapped back. Blood appeared immediately, but he didn't go down. DeLuca threw a left hook fast, heavy, from a shortened range. It hit Bruce on the ear. Bruce's head rocked. For the first time all night, Bruce's stance shifted. His right foot slid on the glass. A piece cut into the arch of his foot, deep enough to make him adjust his weight. The crowd roared. DeLuca saw the opening and charged. He drove forward, throwing combinations left, right, left, each punch carrying his full weight. Bruce's guard held, but he was absorbing damage now, his forearms taking shots that would have broken a lesser man's posture. He was being pushed backward, his feet were moving, the glass was cutting, and then Bruce stopped retreating. He planted both feet, sank his weight, let the glass cut, let it. And when DeLuca threw his next right hand, Bruce didn't deflect it. He used a lop sao, grabbed DeLuca's wrist with his left hand, yanked it downward and across, and simultaneously drove his right fist forward into DeLuca's exposed jaw. The punch traveled 8 inches, maybe less. It was a Wing Chun 1-inch concept applied from close range, shoulder, elbow, wrist, fist, all in sequence, all compressing into a single focused impact. DeLuca's jaw moved sideways, his eyes rolled up. His body went rigid for 1 instant, the telltale sign of a clean knockout, the neural disconnect between brain and muscle, and then he collapsed. He fell on the glass. The sound was a crash, fragments shifting and cracking under 255 pounds. DeLuca didn't move. The room was silent. Bruce stood in the center of the pit, bare feet bleeding, hands at his sides, chest rising and falling. The only indication of effort. His face was still, focused, calm. He looked at Caruso. Caruso looked back. Neither man spoke. Bruce stepped out of the pit. The crowd parted, not politely, reflexively, the way a group of animals moves away from something they don't understand. He sat on the brick ledge and looked at his feet. The cuts were numerous but mostly shallow, dozens of tiny lacerations on the soles and edges, a deeper one on the arch of his right foot where he'd slid during DeLuca's assault. Blood pooled on the glass where he'd stood. A trail of red footprints marked his path from the center of the pit to the edge. Raymond Wong was beside him. Wong had a cloth, a linen napkin from his restaurant, absurdly civilized in that room, and he knelt down and wrapped Bruce's right foot. Bruce let him. He didn't speak. He didn't look at the crowd. He was staring at the center of the pit. Later, Wong would say Bruce sat like that for 3 full minutes. And when he finally stood up, he turned to Wong and said, "I need a pen." Wong gave him a pen. Bruce took the napkin from his own foot, still wet with his blood, and wrote something on it. Wong couldn't read it. Years later, when the story was finally told, someone asked Wong what had been written. Wong said he only saw 2 words before Bruce folded the napkin and put it in his pocket. The 2 words were, "Stand still." Caruso didn't try to stop Bruce from leaving. He didn't speak to him. He didn't offer money, or a rematch, or a threat. He simply watched Bruce walk up the 17 steps, barefoot, leaving red footprints on each one, and disappear into the hallway above. Wong's debt was cleared the next morning. A phone call, 30 seconds, we're settled. Wong never saw Caruso again. 3 weeks after the fight, Dan Inosanto received a letter from Bruce. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a diagram. It showed a human figure in a Wing Chun stance, annotated in Bruce's precise handwriting. Arrows indicated force lines, numbers indicated angles, and at the bottom, underlined twice, was a sentence, "A fighter who cannot be still cannot be complete." This was not a rejection of Jeet Kune Do. It was the opposite. It was Bruce acknowledging that the art he'd built, an art of movement, of flow, of water, had a foundation that he'd almost forgotten. Wing Chun wasn't something he'd moved past, it was something he'd moved from, and on a floor covered in broken glass, in a basement in Lower Manhattan, he'd been forced to return to it. In the months that followed, those who trained with Bruce noticed a change, not a dramatic one, not a new technique or a sudden shift in style, but a density. His stance was lower, his center was heavier. When he stood in front of you, he felt more there, like a man who had found something beneath his own feet and decided to keep it. Inosanto would describe it this way in a 1993 seminar. After New York, Bruce was different. Not faster, not stronger. Deeper. He stood like a man who'd made peace with the ground. Caruso's pit continued to run for another 18 months before a police raid shut it down in the spring of 1968. The building was demolished in 1971. Today, the lot where it stood is occupied by a dry cleaner and a cell phone store. There is no marker, no plaque, no record. But if you could go down those 17 steps, if the staircase still existed, if the kerosene lamps still hung from their rusted hooks, you would find something on those stairs. Footprints, faded now, barely visible. But there, pressed into the concrete in a substance that was once red, 17 steps up, bare feet. The footprints of a man who had walked into a room where he couldn't move and discovered he didn't need to.